Welcome to The Lone Cure, the internet corner where you will learn lifelong lessons in minutes of listening. Today's read is 21 Lessons for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. So if you like this summary, please consider reading the book itself since it is worth it, know again. And if you like this content, like and subscribe and check our channel for more. And welcome, curious minds, to The Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to dig into some important sources and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're tackling Yuval Noah Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Now, if you've read Sapiens or Homo Deus, you know Harari. This book, though, it's really focused on navigating the present. His goal isn't about giving simple answers. It's more about bringing some clarity to this, flood of information we're all dealing with. He wants us to understand the big forces shaping things globally. Nuclear threats, ecological change, tech disruption, fake news. All of it.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how he sets it up. It's not like his usual historical narratives, right? He calls them lessons, and it feels like an invitation, like he's inviting us into this ongoing conversation he's been having about what truly matters now. So this deep dive is really our chance to jump into that conversation and get a handle on what on earth is going on today.
Okay, so let's start with this idea he calls disillusionment. He talks about how that whole ends of history idea, that liberalism had basically won. Well, that seems to be postponed, maybe indefinitely. Things like Brexit, the Trump election in 2016. Harari sees these as signs of this deep disillusionment, and it's hitting right in the heart of liberal societies. People are feeling increasingly irrelevant, maybe, especially with all this talk of blockchain AI. It feels overwhelming. What's underneath that feeling?
Well, Harari suggests something quite profound, I think. He connects it to past revolts, which were often about exploitation, right? Workers against owners. But these populist movements now, he thinks many are driven by people fearing irrelevance. They're using the political power they still have before they feel their economic value just disappears. And that raises a really challenging question. What if an economic elite just doesn't need the masses anymore? Not for labor, maybe not even as consumers in the same way. It's a different kind of struggle. Fighting irrelevance is, well, it's much harder than fighting exploitation because your fundamental worth is being questioned.
Right, which leads us straight into the chapter on jobs. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Harari's point is that the job loss threat isn't just computers getting smarter. It's the combination of infotech and biotech. That's the key. When AI can analyze, biochemical patterns, tiny changes in your heart rate, your expressions, how your pupils dilate, it can understand human emotions and choices maybe better than we understand ourselves. And that means it could outperform drivers, bankers, even lawyers.
Exactly, and he uses some stark examples. Self-driving cars, for instance. They could potentially cut road deaths by 90%. That's what, 1 million lives saved every year?
1 million lives, yeah.
Or think about art. Could an algorithm understand your biochemical responses so well it could create music that's guaranteed to be a hit? Better than most human musicians. Maybe even, as he puts it, outperform Britney Spears. It sounds like science fiction, but the potential is there.
So the argument becomes, it would almost be like madness not to automate in some areas, right? To save those lives, for example.
Precisely. Harari argues we should focus on protecting humans, not necessarily specific jobs, which of course leads to this unsettling idea of a new useless class. And it's not just about lacking a job or education. It could be about lacking the mental stamina to constantly adapt. The pace of change itself might be overwhelming.
But that idea of a single profession for life feels almost ancient now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's becoming antediluvian. He mentions chess, how for a while humans and AI worked together, the centaurs. But then AI like AlphaZero just leapfrogged everyone, humans and other AIs. It suggests this isn't just one sector changing, it's potentially a wave of disruption across many fields.
Okay, so if this massive change is coming, what about solutions? Harari looks at universal basic support, UBS. He mentions the experiments, Finland, Canada, Italy, but he flags that it's probably more complex than just a national basic income.
Right. What does basic even mean in that context? That's a huge question. Harari points out, okay, maybe you cover basic needs, food, shelter, but then the competition just shifts, doesn't it? Fierce competition for non-basic luxuries. And the gap between, say, the tech billionaires and people on UBS could become enormous, maybe unbridgeable. He throws out this really provocative example, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities in Israel. About half the men don't work in the conventional sense. They study religious texts, but they often report high life satisfaction. Strong communities, deep sense of meaning. Could that be a kind of model? A post-work future where finding meaning is more important than finding a job. It forces you to ask some really fundamental questions about society's obligations.
Definitely.
Okay, let's pivot now to liberty. This is such a core value, especially in liberalism. Traditionally, we think authority comes from individual free will, our feelings, desires, choices. That's the basis for democracy, for free markets where the customer is always right. But Harari's warning is that authority might be shifting away from humans towards algorithms.
And he grounds this in a scientific view. He suggests our feelings aren't some mystical free will, but actually biochemical calculations happening inside us. And with biometric sensors everywhere, plus massive computing power, these systems can potentially hack us, understand our desires, predict our decisions, maybe even shape our opinions without us realizing it.
Like the example he gives of an algorithm, maybe identifying someone's sexuality just from data points.
Exactly. Or think about Google Maps. We learn to trust it sometimes more than our own intuition, right? You follow it blindly. He mentions that story, maybe apocryphal, about tourists driving into the ocean following GPS.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely followed my GPS when my gut said, turn left. Thankfully not into the ocean.
Right. We gradually cede that decision-making.
And here's where it gets really mind-bending. If AI makes better decisions for us about our careers, who we should date, maybe even who to marry. Harari asks, what happens to life is this drama of decision-making? That's how we understand ourselves, isn't it? Elections, free markets, so much art and religion revolves around crucial human choices. Would they lose their meaning? He jokes about Anna Karenina asking a Facebook algorithm if she should leave her husband. It sounds absurd, but...
It really challenges our core assumptions, and it leads to this critical issue, ethics in AI. How do you program morality? He brings up the classic trolley problem, that ethical thought experiment. But for AI, it's not a thought experiment, it's an engineering problem. Does the self-driving car prioritize the owner or the pedestrians? You could have a Tesla altruist model or a Tesla egoist. And the surveys he cites show, well, people generally want other people to have the altruistic car, but they'd probably buy the egoist one for themselves.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Human nature.
It highlights how tricky it is to even agree on ethics, let alone code them. Though, on the flip side, once you do set a standard, AI could apply it consistently, maybe eliminate hiring bias, for example.
But the really chilling aspects Harari points to isn't AI rebellion, like in the movies. It's their perfect obedience. He suggests, maybe controversially, that killer robots could enforce the laws of war perfectly. No emotions, no panic, maybe preventing atrocities like Malai. But does he also talk about the downside of that obedience?
Oh, absolutely. That's the terrifying flip side. Imagine a ruthless dictator with an army of perfectly obedient killer robots. There's no chance of mutiny, no soldiers refusing an immoral order. Resistance becomes, well, basically impossible. So Harari paints this pretty stark picture. As algorithms know us better and better, authoritarian governments could gain unprecedented control, even manipulating how citizens feel. Democracy as we know it, he argues, simply can't survive this merger of biotech and infotech without radical change. We could be sleepwalking into digital dictatorships.
And he sees hints of this already.
Yeah, he points to things like the surveillance used in the West Bank as an early example, controlling territory with minimal soldiers because you control the data, the airwaves, the cyber realm.
Okay, so with truth itself seemingly under pressure, he moves to this idea of the post-truth era.
Yeah.
But he kind of pushes back on the idea that this is entirely new. Let's unpack that. He argues that Homo sapiens, us, we've always been a post-truth species in a way. Our power comes from creating and believing fictions, shared stories. That's how we cooperate in massive numbers, through shared myths, whether they're religious, national, or about money, or corporations.
Right, these shared fictions. He gives that example of the medieval blood libels against Jews, like the story of Hugh of Lincoln. That was essentially fake news that lasted for centuries.
Wow, 700 years.
Yeah. And he sees parallels with modern things like Pizzagate. The mechanisms aren't entirely new, maybe just faster and wider now.
So his assertion is pretty bold. Truth was never high on the agenda of Homo sapiens. Is that fair?
It's provocative, isn't it? He argues we often prioritize power over truth. We want to understand the world mainly so we can control it, bend it to our will. And human cooperation depends on this tricky balance between acknowledging reality and believing in useful fictions. Lean too far into fiction, ignore reality, and it backfires. He mentions the Maji Rebellion, where fighters believed magic water would protect them from bullets. It didn't. But without any myths, without shared stories, you can't organize millions of people. Think about money as just a story we all agree on, but our brains react to it like it's intrinsically valuable. We know it's a convention, but we also don't know it in a practical sense.
So if we're naturally inclined toward stories over truth, How do we navigate this? How do we avoid being constantly manipulated? Harari offers a couple of practical tips. First, basically, pay for your news. If it's free, you might be the product being sold. Makes sense.
Yeah, it's a good rule of thumb.
Second, if something is really important, try to read the actual science. Peer-reviewed papers, serious books from credible sources. Go beyond the headlines.
And he even suggests scientists should embrace science fiction more because, realistically, that's often how the public forms its ideas about complex things like AI or climate change. It shapes the imagination.
Which brings us to the really big one. Meaning. What gives life meaning?
Harari says we're storytelling animals. We crave a role in some grand cosmic drama. It's how we make sense of things, whether it's Simba's circle of life, or a religious narrative about creation and judgment, or a national story about independence and destiny, or even a political story about class struggle.
These stories give purpose to everyday life.
Exactly. They frame our experiences. But he also points out what he calls the myopia of eternity, how we pour so much energy and sacrifice into things like eternal cities or nations. These concepts feel huge, permanent to us, but in the grand cosmic scale, they're actually quite ephemeral.
And here's a really powerful insight. How are these stories made real in our minds? Harari argues it's through rituals, and especially through sacrifice. The suffering you endure for a belief, for a story, convinces you and others that it must be true. Why else would you suffer?
He draws parallels between, say, the Catholic Mass transforming bread and wine, ancient animal sacrifices, and even modern things.
Like the cost of maintaining a giant national flag, which feels more real than maybe building sewers. Or someone justifying an expensive car by praising it endlessly.
Yeah, the sacrifice validates the story. It sinks the cost and makes the belief feel tangible.
He even talks about Buddhism, right? The idea of no story.
Right.
That the universe doesn't have inherent meaning. Our feelings are just vibrations.
Yes, but he points out that even that can become another story people cling to. He shares his own experience with Vipassana meditation, quite personally, how he learned, by observing his own mind, that suffering often comes not from external events, but from his mind's reaction to them.
That feeling of wanting something and not getting it generates suffering almost automatically.
Right. He realized how little direct control he had over these deep mental patterns, despite being, a highly intellectual person. He felt more like a gatekeeper observing sensations than the CEO making decisions. And this kind of insight, he suggests, this understanding of your own mind, can be reached just by observing reality, without needing to buy into any specific myth or dogma first.
That's quite a thought. Our own minds being the source of suffering, and maybe the key to navigating the future.
Which leads perfectly into the final section, education. Given everything we've discussed, the tech disruption, the questions about truth, meaning what on earth should we be teaching kids?
Yeah, for a world in 2050 or 2100 that we can barely imagine. Harari says the old model, just cramming facts, is outdated. Information isn't scarce anymore, it's overwhelming.
And the problem isn't censorship blocking information, it's often censors spreading misinformation, drowning out the truth.
So what's the alternative?
He champions what some call the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. But even more broadly, he stresses the need for general life skills, adaptability, the ability to learn constantly, and crucially, maintaining mental balance when faced with the unknown, with constant change.
So learning how to learn, how to stay stable, how to reinvent yourself, maybe multiple times in one life.
Exactly, because professions might vanish in a decade. Your very sense of self might need to adapt.
So wrapping this up, what's a big takeaway for you listening right now? Harari's conclusion is pretty direct. To thrive, maybe even just survive in the coming decades, you need to get to know your own operating system, your mind. Philosophers have said know thyself for ages, but Harari argues it's never been more urgent. Why?
Because you've got competition?
Right. Coca-Cola, Amazon, Google, governments, they are all in a race to hack you, to understand your internal operating system better than you do.
As Harari puts it, quite starkly, we are living in the era of hacking humans.
It really brings it home, doesn't it?
It does. And he takes it one step further, suggesting this race to gather data isn't just about selling you things now. Your attention is just the hook. The real prize is the data itself, because that data could eventually allow them to essentially re-engineer life, maybe even human nature itself, which leads him to pose what might be the most critical political question of our time. How do we regulate the ownership of data? Who owns you, in effect?
A profound and, frankly, slightly terrifying thought to end on.
If this deep dive into Harari's challenging ideas has got you thinking, please do follow us for more. We'd love to hear your reflections on all this.